Mackenzie Sullivan, 28, stood frozen at the altar as her mother's words echoed in her ears. "We're passing the car his parents gave you." My heart dropped to my stomach. The expensive BMW I thought was a wedding gift was being pulled from under me just like everything else in my life. That's when I knew this wedding wasn't the fairy tale ending I'd imagined, but the beginning of a nightmare that would unravel decades of family secrets and lies. Before I continue with my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If family drama gets your heart racing like mine did that day, hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling family. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how karma eventually came knocking on my mother's door. For 28 years, I had been the picture-perfect daughter. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, I was raised by my mother, Elaine Sullivan, a high-powered attorney who demanded nothing short of excellence. My father had passed away when I was just 3 years old. At least that's what I'd been told. Mom kept a single photo of him on our mantle, a handsome man in a naval uniform who allegedly died serving our country. "Your father was a hero," she'd tell me, "and heroes leave big shoes to fill." Those shoes became my life's mission. I graduated valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to Princeton, and landed a prestigious position at a marketing firm in New York. Mom beamed with pride at every achievement, telling anyone who would listen about her daughter's accomplishments. "Mackenzie is going places," she'd say, squeezing my shoulder just a little too tightly. Then I met Jason, the son of a real estate mogul. He was charming, ambitious, and came from the kind of family that my mother approved of, wealthy, connected, and socially prominent. When Jason proposed after 2 years of dating, Mom threw herself into wedding planning with frightening intensity. "This is what we've been working toward," she said, as if my marriage was the culmination of some grand strategy. What struck me as odd was how quickly she bonded with Jason's parents, Richard and Caroline Miller. They shared long dinners without me, exchanged private jokes, and seemed to have an unusual familiarity. "We just click," Mom explained when I asked about their closeness. "They're the kind of people we should have in our lives." 3 months before the wedding, Richard and Caroline presented me with a brand new BMW X5, a sleek black SUV with all the upgrades. "Consider it an early wedding gift," Richard said with a wink. "Family takes care of family." The gift seemed excessive, but Mom encouraged me to accept it. "The Millers are just being generous," she insisted. "This is how people of their caliber express affection." Something about the situation felt off, but I pushed my doubts aside. After all, I was marrying the man I loved, and our families were getting along beautifully, perhaps too beautifully. There were whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, strange glances exchanged between Mom and Richard, and Caroline's occasional tearful hugs that lasted too long. The night before my wedding, I overheard Mom on the phone. "Tomorrow everything falls into place," she said. "After 25 years, we'll finally make things right." I should have questioned her then. I should have demanded answers. Instead, I chalked it up to pre-wedding emotions and went to bed dreaming of my perfect day. The morning of the wedding arrived with picture-perfect weather. As I slipped into my designer gown, another extravagance Mom had insisted upon, she watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pride, yes, but something else. "Anticipation, relief. Today changes everything," she said, adjusting my veil. "After today, all debts will be paid." I smiled, assuming she was making some poetic statement about me starting a new chapter. I had no idea she meant it literally, that my entire existence had been building toward this moment, this alliance between families that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with decades-old secrets. As Jason and I stood before 200 guests in the lavish country club ballroom, I had no idea that my world was about to shatter. The ceremony proceeded perfectly until the moment the officiant asked if anyone objected to our union. That's when my mother stood up, smiled serenely, and spoke the words that would unravel my entire life. "We're passing the car his parents gave you, as well as the remaining balance of the agreement," my mother announced loudly enough for the front rows to hear. "With this marriage, our debt is officially settled, Richard." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Jason's face contorted in confusion, then horror. His parents, rather than looking shocked, exchanged knowing glances. "Mom," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are you talking about?" The officiant cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess." "No," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I want to know what's happening right now." My mother straightened her designer jacket, looking irritatingly composed. "It's quite simple, dear. 25 years ago, I made a business arrangement with the Millers. They loaned me the capital to start my law firm when no bank would touch a single mother with no collateral. In return, I promised my firstborn daughter would marry their son, bringing our families together and ensuring their investment paid off tenfold." The blood drained from my face. "You arranged my marriage." Before I was even born. Richard Miller stepped forward, his usual charm replaced with cold calculation. "Business is business, Mackenzie. Caroline and I provided your mother with $2 million, which has since grown into her considerable fortune. Your marriage to our son seals the partnership and brings both families considerable advantages." Jason backed away from me, his face pale. "Did you know about this?" he demanded. "Of course not," I cried. "How could you think I would agree to something so medieval?" "Jason knew," Caroline said softly, not meeting my eyes. "We told him when you started dating. The meeting wasn't as coincidental as you believe." My knees nearly buckled. The man I loved, the man I trusted, had been playing me for 2 years. Every date, every kiss, every whispered promise had been part of a business contract signed before I took my first breath. "Is this true?" I asked Jason desperately, searching his face for denial. His silence was answer enough. "The car was a down payment," my mother continued, as if discussing the weather rather than the sale of her daughter. "The wedding gifts, the honeymoon home in the Hamptons, all part of the final settlement." The room spun around me. 200 people watched as my life imploded, as the perfect daughter discovered she was nothing more than a commodity traded between wealthy families like a prize racehorse. "What about my father?" I asked, a terrible suspicion forming. "Was that a lie too?" My mother's expression hardened. "Your father was weak. He wanted out of our marriage, threatened to take you with him. I couldn't allow that. You were my investment, my future." "What did you do?" I whispered, though part of me already knew the answer. "I didn't do anything," she replied coldly. "But when a man has as many enemies as your father did, accidents happen. The insurance money funded my first year of law school. Richard's investment came after, when I needed to expand." The truth hit me like a physical blow. My father hadn't died a hero. He'd been eliminated because he stood in the way of my mother's ambitions. The photo on the mantle, the stories of his service, all fabrications designed to create a convenient narrative. "You murdered him," I said, my voice hollow. "I secured our future," she corrected. "And now with this marriage, everything is complete. The Millers get their dynasty merger, I've repaid my debt with interest, and you get a wealthy husband and the life you've been groomed for. Everyone wins." I looked around the room at my soon-to-be husband, who had lied to me for years, at his parents who had purchased me before I was born, at my mother who had orchestrated my entire life for financial gain. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The perfect daughter, the obedient pawn, ceased to exist. "No," I said, my voice ringing through the hushed ballroom. "The deal is off." My mother's face darkened. "Don't be dramatic, Mackenzie. You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself." I laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "You sold your unborn child to pay off a loan. You had my father killed. You arranged a marriage in the 21st century. And I'm the one who's embarrassing." I turned to the stunned guests. "This wedding is cancelled." I apologize for the inconvenience, but it turns out I was the only person here who didn't know I was being traded like a corporate asset. With shaking hands, I removed my engagement ring and placed it on the altar. Then I gathered my ridiculous designer skirts and walked down the aisle alone, head high, despite the tears streaming down my face. Behind me, chaos erupted. Jason called my name. Richard Miller demanded my mother honor their agreement. Caroline began to sob theatrically. But all I could hear was my own heartbeat, steady and strong for perhaps the first time in my life. Outside, the irony of the situation hit me. The black BMW, my supposed gift, was waiting to take us to the reception. The driver looked confused as I approached alone in my wedding dress. "Change of plans," I told him. "I need you to take me far away from here." As the car pulled away from the country club, I caught a glimpse of my mother in the rearview mirror, her face contorted with rage. 28 years of being the perfect daughter ended in that moment. Now it was time to become someone else entirely, someone who would make them all pay for what they'd done. The first night of my non-honeymoon was spent in a modest motel off Interstate 95, paid for with the emergency cash I'd tucked into my wedding clutch. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd gone from a 5-star resort in Bali to a roadside inn with flickering fluorescent lights and suspicious stains on the carpet. My wedding dress hung limply from the shower rod, a $15,000 reminder of the life I'd just abandoned. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's cold calculation, heard her clinical description of my father's accident, felt the weight of 28 years of manipulation crashing down on me. By morning, grief had hardened into something else entirely: determination. I had exactly $843 in my personal checking account. My savings, investments, and retirement funds were all linked to accounts my mother had helped establish. I knew her well enough to realize she'd freeze everything the moment she recovered from the public embarrassment I'd caused. My credit cards would be next. Using the motel's ancient computer, I emptied my checking account, then used the last of my accessible funds to buy a bus ticket to Philadelphia, a city where I knew no one, which was precisely the point. I needed distance and anonymity to plan my next move. The Greyhound station was a far cry from the first-class travel I was accustomed to. Clutching my duffel bag purchased from a Target near the motel, along with some basic necessities, I boarded the bus with my head down and a baseball cap pulled low. The wedding that wasn't had made local news. Socialite leaves millionaire at altar, complete with unflattering photos snapped by opportunistic guests. In Philadelphia, I found a youth hostel willing to take cash for a week's stay. The dormitory-style accommodations were another shock to my system, but the international travelers paid little attention to the quiet American woman who kept to herself. I bought a prepaid phone, created new email accounts, and began researching what I needed most: leverage. My mother hadn't built her reputation as one of Connecticut's most formidable attorneys by playing fair. If her casual confession of arranging my father's death was any indication, she operated outside the law when it suited her purposes. I needed evidence of her crimes, not just for justice but for protection. As long as she viewed me as a threat to her carefully constructed image, I wasn't safe. Accessing her files directly was impossible. Her office used state-of-the-art security, and she'd surely revoked my family access credentials. But there was one person who might still have information I could use: my mother's longtime assistant, Vivian. Vivian had worked for my mother for 15 years. She knew where every skeleton was buried, perhaps literally. She'd also been the closest thing to a maternal figure I'd had growing up, bringing me soup when I was sick and attending school events when my mother was too busy. If anyone might help me, it was Vivian. I composed a careful email from my new anonymous account requesting a meeting. The response came within hours: corner table at Reading Terminal Market, tomorrow, noon. Vivian looked older than I, remembered the lines around her eyes, deeper, her posture more stooped. When she saw me approach, genuine relief flooded her face. "Thank God you're all right," she said, embracing me. "Your mother has private investigators searching 3 states for you." "Why?" I asked bitterly. The merchandise walked off without completing the transaction. Vivian's expression darkened. "It's worse than that, Mackenzie. She's telling people you had a psychotic break, that you've been struggling with mental health issues for years and stopped taking your medication before the wedding." The calculated cruelty took my breath away. She's setting me up. If I come forward with what she confessed about my father, no one will believe me." "That's not all," Vivian said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "She's filing for emergency conservatorship, claiming you're a danger to yourself. If the judge grants it, she'll control everything, your money, your medical decisions, where you live." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were court documents with my name listed as the subject, medical records I'd never seen, diagnosing conditions I didn't have, and statements from concerned family friends about my deteriorating mental state. "How did you get these?" "I've been making copies of your mother's more questionable activities for years," Vivian said quietly. "Insurance in case she ever turned on me the way she turns on anyone who becomes inconvenient. There's more offshore accounts, client funds that were misappropriated, evidence of jury tampering in at least 3 major cases." She pushed a USB drive toward me. "Everything is here. Financial records, emails, recorded conversations, including some between your mother and Richard Miller dating back to when you were an infant." I stared at the tiny device that contained proof of my mother's crimes. "Why are you giving me this? She'll know it was you." "Because I helped her hurt you," Vivian said, her eyes filling with tears. "All these years I knew what she was doing, grooming you for this arranged marriage, lying about your father, manipulating every aspect of your life. I convinced myself I was protecting you by staying close, but the truth is I was a coward. I prioritized my paycheck over your freedom." The raw honesty made my throat tight. "What happened to my father? The real story. His name was Daniel Sullivan. He was a public defender, brilliant but idealistic. He and your mother met in law school. When she became pregnant, they married, but their values were completely opposed. She wanted wealth and status. He wanted to help people who couldn't afford justice. When you were 3, he discovered she was falsifying evidence to win cases. He threatened to report her to the Bar Association." Vivian took a shaky breath. 3 days later, his car went off a bridge. The official report said the brakes failed. Your mother received a substantial insurance payout, enough to open her own firm specializing in corporate law. A year later, she approached Richard Miller for investment capital, offering you as future collateral. The cafe around us buzzed with normal activity, tourists buying pretzels, locals grabbing coffee, while my world tilted on its axis once again. She killed him because he had integrity. "And she'll do the same to you if you threaten her reputation," Vivian warned. "The conservatorship hearing is in 2 weeks. Once it's granted, you'll have no legal standing to fight back. You need to use what's on that drive before she finds you." I closed my fingers around the USB drive, feeling its weight not just in grams but in the power it represented. "I need to disappear for a while, somewhere she won't think to look." "Take this," Vivian said, pressing a thick envelope into my hands. 10,000 in cash. A clean phone. The deed to a cabin in the Adirondacks that belonged to my uncle. It's remote, paid off, and not connected to either of us on paper. "Why would you risk everything for me?" "Because I couldn't save your father," she said simply. "But maybe I can help his daughter." As we parted ways, Vivian gripped my arm. "Be careful, Mackenzie. Your mother didn't build her empire by being careless. When you move against her, make sure it's decisive. You won't get a second chance." I nodded, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. The perfect daughter was gone. In her place stood a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. 2 months passed in the solitude of the Adirondack cabin, where the only sounds were wind through pine trees and the occasional cry of a distant loon. I'd arrived as Mackenzie Sullivan's socialite fugitive, but in this wilderness I was forging myself into someone new, someone dangerous. The conservatorship hearing had come and gone. According to the news articles I accessed using the cabin's spotty internet connection, the judge had granted my mother temporary control of my assets, while law enforcement conducted a wellness search. My face appeared in sympathetic news segments where concerned loved ones pleaded for information about my whereabouts. My mother played her role perfectly, the distraught parent worried about her mentally unstable daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. For the first time in my life, I was thinking clearly. The USB drive Vivian had given me contained enough evidence to destroy my mother 10 times over. Emails discussing my father's unfortunate accident. Financial records showing payments to a mechanic who later died of an apparent overdose. The original contract with the Millers outlining the terms of their investment and the merger of family assets that would occur when I married Jason. Most damning were the recordings. My mother's voice calmly discussing jury tampering, witness intimidation, and the strategic destruction of evidence that would have exonerated clients she wanted to lose. The Elaine Sullivan portrayed in these files wasn't just corrupt. She was a sociopath who viewed the law as a game she'd rigged in her favor. I organized the evidence meticulously, creating backups and storing them in secure cloud accounts accessible only with multi-factor authentication. Then I began researching my targets, my mother, the Millers, and Jason. I needed to understand their vulnerabilities, their pressure points, the places where a strategic strike would cause maximum damage. My mother's weakness was obvious: her reputation. She'd built her life around being respected and feared in equal measure. Strip away the veneer of legitimacy and she would crumble. The Millers were more complex. Their real estate empire stretched across 3 states, but deep research revealed it was heavily leveraged. A significant portion of their assets was tied to a new development project that had recently received controversial approval from zoning boards in circumstances that reeked of bribery. As for Jason, the more I dug, the more I realized he was as much a puppet as I had been. Correspondence between him and his father showed years of pressure to comply with the arrangement, threats of disinheritance, psychological manipulation that mirrored my own experience. In one email, written shortly after we began dating, he told his father, "She's actually kind and intelligent. I hate lying to her." The response had been chilling: "Your feelings are irrelevant. Honor your obligation to this family." I felt a flicker of pity for the man I'd almost married, but not enough to spare him from what was coming. He'd had choices. He could have warned me. Instead, he'd participated in my deception until the very end. By the 3rd month of my self-imposed exile, I had formulated a plan that would dismantle the lives of those who had treated mine as a commodity. It would require precision timing, nerves of steel, and resources I didn't yet have. The last problem was solved unexpectedly one rainy afternoon when my burner phone rang, a number I'd given only to Vivian. "There's a package for you at the post office in town," she said without preamble. "Box 437. The key is under the fake rock by the cabin's back step, just like you said." "What package? I didn't order anything." "Your father did," Vivian replied, her voice thick with emotion. 25 years ago, before he died, Daniel set up a trust in your name. It was to be released on your 30th birthday, but given the circumstances, I convinced the trustee to release it early based on the evidence of your mother's actions." My heart pounded. My father left me money. And letters. Documents. His own insurance policy against your mother in case something happened to him. She paused. "The trust is substantial, Mackenzie. Nearly $8 million grown from his life insurance that your mother never knew existed. He registered it offshore beyond her reach." Tears blurred my vision. Even from beyond the grave, my father was protecting me. "Thank you, Vivian. There's one more thing," she said. "The conservatorship hearing for permanent control is scheduled for next month. If you're going to move against her, it needs to be before then." "It will be, I promised." "Is everything else in place?" "Yes." "The FBI agent has reviewed the preliminary evidence and believes there's enough for a RICO case. The journalist has agreed to embargo the story until we give the signal. And I've gathered the names of 7 former clients who are willing to testify about evidence tampering once they know they're not alone." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Then it's time to end this. 2 weeks from today, everything changes." As I hung up, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The plan was in motion. The countdown had begun. You know, I'm about to reach a pivotal moment in my story where everything I've been building toward is about to come to a head. It reminds me of those moments in our own lives where we need to take a stand against those who have wronged us. Have you ever reached that breaking point? While I take a moment to gather my strength for what comes next in my journey, hit that like button if you've ever had to stand up against family betrayal, and subscribe to hear more stories of justice and redemption like mine. I promise what happens next will show you exactly why they say karma always comes back around. On a crisp Tuesday morning, I returned to Connecticut as if rising from the dead. Not as the obedient daughter in designer clothes and perfect makeup, but as a woman with purpose dressed in a simple black pantsuit purchased with my father's trust money. My hair, once highlighted and styled weekly at my mother's insistence, was now its natural brown cut into a practical bob. I looked like my father in the one real photograph I'd found among his belongings. Same determined jaw, same clear eyes. My first stop was the offices of the Hartford Courier, where investigative journalist Maya Winters was waiting. I'd chosen her carefully. Known for her integrity, impossible to bribe, and with a particular interest in corruption cases. For 3 hours I laid out the evidence, explaining the complex web of crimes spanning decades. Maya's recorder captured everything, her face growing more grave with each revelation. "This goes beyond one corrupt lawyer," she said when I finished. "This is systemic abuse of the legal system, conspiracy, possible murder. The implications are enormous." "That's why I came to you first," I replied. "The story needs to break simultaneously with the legal actions. No warnings, no chance for them to destroy evidence or flee." From the newspaper I went directly to the FBI field office where Special Agent Torres was expecting me. The meeting lasted until evening. Formal statements, recorded evidence officially entered into the record, witness statements corroborated. By the time I left, arrest warrants were being prepared for my mother, Richard Miller, and 3 judges implicated in the bribery scheme. "We'll move at 6 a.m. tomorrow," Agent Torres confirmed. "All targets simultaneously." And the emergency petition to block the conservatorship filed with Judge Hannigan 10 minutes ago. She's the only district judge not connected to your mother's network. The hearing is set for 9 a.m., but given the nature of the evidence, I expect she'll grant an immediate stay. The pieces were falling into place with a precision that would have made my mother proud had they not been aimed at her destruction. My final stop that night was the most difficult. The Miller estate, where I knew both Jason and his parents would be gathered for their weekly family dinner. The security guard recognized me despite my changed appearance, buzzing me through with a confused expression. Let them wonder why the mentally unstable runaway bride had returned. The maid who answered the door nearly dropped her tray. "Miss Sullivan, we weren't expecting you." "I'm sure you weren't," I said pleasantly. "I'd like to speak with the family." "All of them." She led me to the formal dining room where the scene was exactly as I'd imagined. Richard at the head of the table, Caroline fussing over the presentation of some elaborate dish, Jason staring blankly at his wine glass. All 3 froze when I entered. Mackenzie. Richard recovered first, rising from his chair. "This is unexpected." "I imagine it is," I replied coolly. "Please don't let me interrupt your meal." "I won't be staying long." Caroline's hand fluttered to her throat. "Are you? Well, we've been so concerned." "Spare me the performance, Caroline. We're well past that now." Jason hadn't moved, his face drained of color. "Why are you here?" he asked hoarsely. I set my briefcase on the table and withdrew 3 identical manila envelopes, placing one before each of them. "I'm here to give you a choice." Richard's eyes narrowed. "What kind of choice?" "The kind my father never received," I said evenly. "In these envelopes are copies of evidence that will be made public tomorrow morning. Bank records documenting the $2 million you paid my mother 25 years ago to arrange our marriage. Emails discussing the arrangement and how to ensure I remained unaware of it. Transcripts of meetings where you discussed zoning bribes for your Westport development. Caroline gasped, her perfectly manicured hand trembling as she reached for her envelope. The FBI will be here at 6 a.m. with arrest warrants for both of you, I continued, addressing Richard and Caroline. The charges include conspiracy, fraud, bribery of public officials, and accessory after the fact in the death of Daniel Sullivan, my father. You can't prove any of this, Richard blustered, but the sweat beading on his forehead betrayed his panic. I already have. Your own records confirm everything. The prosecutors are particularly interested in the offshore account you used to pay the mechanic who tampered with my father's brakes. I turned to Jason, whose face had crumpled in shock. You have a different choice. I didn't know about your father, he whispered. You have to believe me. I do, I acknowledged. But you knew about the arranged marriage. You lied to me for 2 years, pretending to love me when you were just fulfilling a contract. Tears filled his eyes. It wasn't all a lie. I did care for you. But my father threatened to disown me to destroy my career. And that justified deceiving me, planning to trap me in a marriage I didn't know was a business transaction. He had no answer for that. I pushed his envelope closer. Inside is a cooperation agreement. Sign it, testify against your parents and my mother regarding the bribery schemes and marriage arrangement, and the prosecutor will recommend probation instead of prison time. Refuse and you'll face the same charges they do. Jason stared at the document, then at his parents. 28 years of conditioning warred with self-preservation on his face. Don't you dare, Richard hissed. Family loyalty? Is that what you call it? Jason interrupted, his voice suddenly stronger. You sold me like a commodity, just like Mackenzie was sold. You never asked what I wanted. He reached for a pen. Richard lunged across the table, but I was prepared. The taser Vivian had included in my survival package delivered 50,000 volts to his reaching hand. He collapsed back into his chair, groaning. The security cameras in this room were disabled 20 minutes ago, I informed them calmly. The staff has been given the rest of the night off with generous bonuses to ensure their discretion. We won't be interrupted. Jason signed the cooperation agreement with a surprisingly steady hand, then looked up at me. I am sorry, Mackenzie. For whatever that's worth now. It's worth exactly this, I replied, taking the signed document. A reduced sentence. As I gathered my belongings to leave, Caroline found her voice at last. You've ruined everything, she said bitterly. Decades of work, our reputation, our legacy. I paused at the door. No, Caroline. You did that yourselves the moment you decided to purchase an unborn child as a future daughter-in-law. I'm just making sure you pay the appropriate price. The next morning unfolded exactly as planned. At precisely 6 a.m. FBI agents simultaneously arrested my mother at her home, Richard and Caroline Miller at their estate, and 3 corrupt judges implicated in the bribery scheme. By 7 a.m., the Hartford Courier's website had crashed from traffic as Maya Winters's exposé went live, detailing decades of corruption within Connecticut's legal and real estate circles. At 9 a.m., Judge Hannigan not only stayed the conservatorship proceedings but issued a restraining order preventing my mother from having any contact with me. By noon, the Connecticut Bar Association had initiated emergency disbarment proceedings. I watched it all unfold from a hotel suite downtown, Vivian beside me as supportive witness and collaborator. When the news showed footage of my mother being led away in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally cracking as she screamed threats at the cameras, I felt no triumph, only a profound relief that her power was finally broken. What happens now? Vivian asked as we switched off the television. I looked down at the small box I'd retrieved from my father's trust, his wedding ring, a journal chronicling his suspicions about my mother, and a letter addressed to me that had waited 25 years to be read. In it he'd written, "If you're reading this, I couldn't protect you as I'd hoped. Remember that justice matters, but so does the life you build afterward. Don't let vengeance consume what remains." Now, I said, tucking the letter back into the box, I start living the life they tried to steal from me. The trials began 3 months later, dominating local news and even attracting national attention. HEIR and a spare socialite sold by mother in modern marriage contract, read one particularly sensational headline. I attended each day of proceedings, sitting silently in the back row, as the elaborate conspiracy unraveled in public testimony. My mother's trial came first. She'd hired the most expensive defense team in the Northeast, but even they couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence. Emails, financial records, recorded conversations, and witness testimony painted a damning picture of a woman who had manipulated the legal system for decades, accumulating wealth and power through systematic corruption. The most powerful testimony came from unexpected sources, former clients who stepped forward to describe how she had deliberately tanked their cases when it benefited her larger schemes. Junior associates who had been ordered to falsify evidence and court clerks who had witnessed her improper communications with judges now facing their own legal troubles. But it was Jason's testimony that proved most devastating to her defense. Ashen-faced but composed, he detailed the arrangement between our families, reading aloud emails in which my mother had referred to me as the asset and discussed my education and career choices in terms of how they would increase my value in the marriage market. Did Mackenzie Sullivan know about this arrangement? The prosecutor asked him. No, Jason replied, unable to look at me. She was deliberately kept in the dark. Both our families agreed that she would be more cooperative if she believed the relationship was genuine. And was it genuine? Jason hesitated. Not from my side, at least not at first. I was under enormous pressure from my parents to fulfill the contract. But Mackenzie herself was. He finally glanced at me. Authentic in everything she did. She believed we were in love. How did you feel about participating in this deception? I told myself it was just business, he said quietly. That the ends justified the means. I was wrong, and I'll regret my part in it for the rest of my life. Throughout her trial, my mother never once looked in my direction. She sat ramrod straight, whispering furiously to her attorneys, her expression alternating between indignation and calculation. Even when the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, she showed no emotion, simply straightening her designer jacket as the bailiffs approached. Only when the judge announced her sentence, 22 years without possibility of parole, did she finally break. "This is absurd," she shouted, rising from her seat. "Everything I did was for her. She'd be nothing without me." As they led her away, her eyes found mine at last. The hatred in them was palpable, but underneath lurked something else: disbelief. She truly couldn't comprehend how her perfect plan had unraveled, how the daughter she'd groomed to be the perfect pawn had become her downfall. The Millers' trial followed quickly. With Jason testifying against them and my mother already convicted, their legal defense crumbled. Richard received 18 years for his role in the conspiracy, including evidence that he had helped finance the tampering with my father's car. Caroline, who had played a lesser role in the criminal aspects of their business, received 8 years. Their real estate empire, built on bribery and fraud, was dismantled by government seizures and civil lawsuits. Jason, true to the cooperation agreement, received 5 years probation and community service. The last time I saw him was in the courthouse hallway after his sentencing. He approached hesitantly, eyes downcast. "I know it doesn't mean much," he said, "but I am sorry, Mackenzie. I should have been braver." "Yes," I replied simply. "You should have." "What will you do now?" he asked. I considered the question. The media had dubbed me the arranged bride who fought back, offering lucrative deals for exclusive interviews and book rights. But sensationalism held no appeal for me. "I'm going to finish what my father started," I told him. The Daniel Sullivan Legal Aid Foundation launched last week. We'll provide representation for people who can't afford to fight back against corrupt systems. Understanding flickered in his eyes. "Using your mother's money to fund exactly the kind of work she despised." "Poetic justice," I agreed. "The foundation will be my testimony going forward, not interviews or tell-all books." Jason nodded slowly. I hope you find some peace, Mackenzie. After everything that was taken from you. Not taken, I corrected him. I've reclaimed it. There's a difference. In the year that followed, I worked to rebuild a life authentic to myself rather than one designed by my mother's ambitions. The foundation grew, taking on cases that challenged corrupt practices in corporate law, real estate development, and family court. I completed a master's degree in public policy not because anyone expected it, but because I wanted to better understand the systems I was now working to reform. Vivian became the foundation's operations director, bringing her organizational skills and insider knowledge of how powerful firms operated. Together we built something meaningful from the ashes of deception. On the anniversary of my non-wedding day, I visited my father's grave for the first time. His real grave, not the empty memorial my mother had used in her elaborate fiction. I placed fresh flowers before his headstone and opened his journal to the passage I'd come to cherish most. If my daughter inherits anything from me, I hope it is not my caution but my conviction. The world will try to shape her to its purposes. My prayer is that she finds the strength to shape herself instead. As I traced his words with my finger, I realized I had finally fulfilled his hope. The perfect daughter was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced betrayal, claimed justice, and now looked to the future on her own terms. The car his parents had given me, that trivial wedding gift that had triggered the unraveling of decades of lies, had long since been sold. The proceeds donated to a scholarship fund for children who had lost parents to violence. Some gifts came with too many strings attached, but my father's true gift, the courage to stand for what was right, even against overwhelming opposition, that I would keep forever. 5 years after the trials that shocked Connecticut society, I stood at the podium accepting the State Bar Association's Public Service Award for the Daniel Sullivan Legal Aid Foundation's work in reforming judicial oversight. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The daughter of the state's most notorious corrupt attorney now leading the charge for legal ethics and transparency. Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing, I told the audience. It's about creating systems where corruption cannot thrive in the first place. As I looked out at the gathered attorneys, judges, and advocates, I saw not my mother's world of power and influence trading, but my father's vision of law as a tool for positive change. The foundation had helped overturn dozens of wrongful convictions tainted by corrupt practices, and had established a whistleblower program for legal professionals who witnessed misconduct. After the ceremony, a young law student approached me, clutching a copy of the ethics textbook that now included a chapter on my mother's case. "Miss Sullivan," she said nervously, "your story is why I decided to become a lawyer. To make sure what happened to your father never happens to anyone else." In that moment, I realized that the painful legacy of my past had transformed into something powerful: inspiration for a new generation committed to integrity over ambition, truth over convenient lies. My mother remained in prison, refusing all my attempts at contact. The woman who had orchestrated my entire life now wouldn't acknowledge my existence. Richard Miller had died in his 3rd year of incarceration. Caroline had been released early for good behavior but lived in obscurity, their social standing destroyed. Jason had completed his probation and moved to the West Coast, where he worked for a non-profit housing organization seeking redemption in his own way. As for me, I had finally found the freedom to define myself on my own terms. The foundation's work fulfilled me in ways that my mother's carefully planned career path never could have. I had genuine friendships untainted by social climbing or strategic alliances. And I had reclaimed my father's legacy from the lies that had buried it for so many years. The wedding that never happened had set me free. The car his parents had given me had revealed the price tag they'd placed on my life. But in losing everything I thought I wanted, I had gained something far more valuable: the truth and the chance to build something meaningful from it. Looking back, I can see now that what my mother never understood was that people aren't assets to be traded or investments to be maximized. Real family isn't built on transactions but on love and truth, something she was incapable of giving but which I've found in the community I've built around myself. I wonder, have you ever experienced a moment where family betrayal ultimately led to your freedom? If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear that. Sometimes losing what we thought we wanted opens the door to what we truly need. Subscribe for more stories about finding justice and rebuilding after betrayal, and comment below with your own experiences of family karma. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful futures are born from the most painful pasts.